The notification lit up my phone screen like a flare in the darkness of my dorm room. Just a buzz at first, then another, then a cascade of them vibrating against the wooden desk until I couldn't ignore it anymore. I picked it up, squinting against the blue light, and my stomach dropped. The video was already viral. 20,000 views when I clicked it. 30,000 by the time it loaded. The thumbnail alone made my chest tighten. A grainy surveillance angle. Someone I recognized too well, someone who wasn't supposed to be there, doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. My father. Senior Pastor Daniel Montgomery, the man who stood behind the pulpit every Sunday morning, who counseled broken marriages, who preached about integrity and faithfulness and walking in the light. I watched it once. That was enough. The clip was only 47 seconds long, but those 47 seconds burned into my brain like a brand. I sat there in the dim glow of my laptop screen, the half-finished theology paper forgotten, my hands gripping the edge of the desk, and felt my entire world fracture. The comments section scrolled past in a blur of shock and anger and mockery, some from people I'd never heard of. Others from people I grew up with, people who called themselves family. "Are you serious?" I whispered to the empty room. My roommate was out for the night, and I was grateful for that small mercy. How could you? The messages started flooding in. Friends from church, kids from youth group, people asking if I'd seen it, if it was real, if I was okay. I wasn't okay. I set the phone face down on the desk and pressed my palms against my eyes until I saw stars. My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape, and I couldn't breathe right. Everything I thought I knew, everything my family stood for, everything we'd built over years of ministry. It was all collapsing in real time, broadcast to the internet for everyone to judge. Does God still care about me in this moment? The question rose unbidden, sharp and accusing. Because it sure didn't feel like it. It felt like abandonment, like being exposed under a spotlight with nowhere to hide. I drove home that night. I don't remember much about the drive except the way my hands shook on the steering wheel and how every song on the radio felt like an accusation. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark, except for the porch light my mom always left on. Inside, the living room felt smaller than I remembered, suffocated by the weight of unspoken things. I sat on the worn sofa where we'd hosted countless church small groups and family devotionals. The Bible still sat on the coffee table, unopened, a thin layer of dust on the leather cover. The walls were lined with family photos, my father shaking hands with missionaries, my mom serving at church events, all of us smiling for the camera at some ministry banquet or another. We looked happy in those pictures. We looked whole. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. More messages, more questions, someone from the church board, my father's assistant. Kids from youth group who didn't know what to say, but felt like they had to say something. I turned it to silent and stared at the photos on the wall. They felt distant now, like looking at strangers. Or maybe like looking at actors who'd finally been caught performing. The loneliness settled into my bones like winter cold. I'd grown up in this house, surrounded by people, always part of something bigger than myself. But now, sitting in the silence, I felt utterly alone. The facade we'd maintained for years, the perfect pastor's family, the model of Christian living, had shattered, and I didn't know who we were without it. I didn't know who I was. Is this the end of everything I believed about my family and God? The question gnawed at me. Because if my father, who preached about faithfulness and spoke in the name of God, could fall this far, what did that say about everything else? What did it say about faith itself? I didn't have answers. All I had was this coiling bitterness in my chest, tightening like a fist around my heart. To understand how I got here, you have to see what things looked like before the cracks showed. 2 years earlier, I was sitting in this same living room on a Sunday afternoon, surrounded by people from church. My father held court in the center of the room, telling stories with that warm authority everyone loved. "The Lord has been so faithful to this family," he said, gesturing to the photos on the wall, and everyone nodded and smiled. He made people laugh, made them feel seen. The walls were covered with the same photos then, but they felt different, proof of a life well lived, evidence of faithful service. I sat quietly in the corner watching. I'd learned early that being the pastor's son meant playing a role. You smiled at the right times. You memorized your verses. You didn't complain or question too loudly, because everyone was watching, always watching, measuring you against some impossible standard of spiritual maturity. My father would introduce me to visitors, his hand heavy on my shoulder, pride in his voice. "This is Ethan, my oldest. He's going to do great things for the kingdom." But when the crowd left and the door closed, that warmth evaporated. My father became distant, preoccupied, his mind already on next Sunday's sermon or the latest church crisis. I'd try to talk to him about school or doubts or just anything that mattered to me, and he'd nod absently, half listening, always somewhere else. The man who had time for everyone's problems never seemed to have time for mine. I learned to keep my questions to myself. I learned to hide behind the same smile everyone else expected. But inside, the pressure built. How do you live faithfully when your home is full of secrets? When the model of faith you're supposed to follow feels unreachable, untouchable, more performance than relationship? I didn't have answers then either. I just knew something was wrong, something beneath the surface that nobody wanted to name. 1 year earlier, I was in my bedroom late at night when I heard them. My parents arguing in the kitchen below. The walls in our old house were thin and sound-traveled. My father's voice was defensive, sharp in a way I'd never heard it in public. My mother's was quieter, but there was steel in it, a firmness that cut through his excuses. I couldn't make out all the words, but I caught enough. "When were you really at that conference?" My mother asked, her voice low but firm. My father's answer was muffled, but I heard him say, "You're making something out of nothing." Then came the names I didn't recognize, times that didn't add up. My father's tone shifting from defensive to angry to something that sounded almost like pleading, my mother refusing to let it go. I sat on the edge of my bed, frozen, my heart pounding. I wanted to go down there, to understand, to stop whatever was happening. But I was afraid of what I might learn, afraid of shattering the illusion I'd been clinging to. The next morning, everything looked normal. My father preached on forgiveness. My mother sat in the front row, her expression carefully neutral. I sat with my friends in the youth section and scrolled through social media posts, praising my father's latest sermon series, talking about how anointed he was, how blessed our church was to have such a faithful leader. The contrast made me sick. I started building walls around my heart, brick by brick, because I didn't know what else to do. Fear and confusion twisted together into something harder, something that protected me from hoping too much or trusting too deeply. What secret lies behind the smiles and sermons, I wondered. Can faith survive when trust is broken at home? I didn't want to know the answer, but some part of me knew I'd find out eventually. And then I did. The viral video answered every question I'd been too afraid to ask. Walking across campus the morning after the video broke felt like moving through water. The January wind cut through my jacket, but I barely felt it. Everything was harder breathing, thinking, putting one foot in front of the other. Friends tried to engage me between classes, asking how I was doing, offering sympathy or curiosity or that uncomfortable mix of both. "I'm fine," I said. Again and again, my responses clipped and cold. I wasn't fine. I was drowning in anger and shame, and I didn't know how to explain that to people who'd never had their family's dirty laundry broadcast to the world. My phone kept buzzing with messages about the video, articles about my father's fall from grace, hot takes from people who'd never met him but had plenty of opinions about his sin and our family's hypocrisy. The bitterness inside me coiled tighter with every notification, every sideways glance, every whispered conversation that stopped when I walked by. It felt like armor, this anger, like the only thing standing between me and complete devastation. If I let it go, if I let myself feel the full weight of the betrayal, I'd shatter. So I held on to it, nursed it, let it grow until it was the loudest voice in my head. Is bitterness really my only protection? Some part of me knew the answer was no, but I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to stop myself from becoming a prisoner to this anger. That afternoon, I drove back to the church. I hadn't planned it, but I found myself pulling into the parking lot, staring at the building I'd grown up in. My father's office was on the second floor, overlooking the sanctuary. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my jaw clenched, my hands balled into fists. His door was closed. I didn't knock. I just pushed it open and walked in. He was sitting behind his desk, looking older than I'd ever seen him. The light from the window cast shadows across his face, deepening the lines around his eyes. He looked up when I entered, and, for a moment, neither of us spoke. "Ethan," he said finally, his voice rough. "How could you?" The words came out sharper than I intended, laced with all the anger I'd been holding back. "How could you stand up there every week and preach about faithfulness and integrity when you were doing that?" He flinched like I'd hit him. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "You never meant for it to happen?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You mean you never meant to get caught?" "That's not." He stood up, reaching toward me, but I stepped back. "Ethan, please. I know I've hurt you. I know I've hurt everyone. But I need you to understand." "Understand what? That you're a hypocrite? That everything you taught me was a lie?" His face crumpled, and for a second I saw something raw there, something that looked like genuine pain. But I couldn't let myself care. The bitterness had its claws too deep. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right now," he said quietly. "I know I don't deserve that. But I am asking you to believe that I'm sorry, that I'm trying to make this right." "Make it right?" I laughed, and it came out harsh and broken. "You can't make this right. You destroyed everything. Our family, the church, all of it. And for what?" He didn't have an answer, or, if he did, I didn't wait to hear it. I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking again, and there was a sick feeling in my stomach, like I'd just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. But the bitterness whispered that I was right to be angry, right to lash out, right to build these walls. Because if I didn't protect myself, who would? I sat in my car in the church parking lot for a long time after that, staring at the building through the windshield. The afternoon sun glinted off the stained glass windows, the same windows I'd seen every Sunday of my life. But they didn't look beautiful anymore. They just looked like more illusions, more carefully constructed images hiding ugly truth. Does God still care about me? The question echoed in my mind again, louder this time, because I couldn't see how he did. I couldn't see how any of this was part of some divine plan. It just felt like chaos, like abandonment, like falling through space with nothing to catch me. I started the car and drove back to campus, the weight of everything pressing down on my chest. The confrontation with my father hadn't brought the relief I'd hoped for. If anything, I felt more lost than before, more alone, more convinced that bitterness was all I had left. And the worst part? Some part of me knew this wasn't sustainable. This anger, this isolation, it was killing something inside me, something I couldn't name but could feel slipping away. But I didn't know how to let go. I didn't know how to forgive. I didn't know how to move forward when everything I'd built my life on had been revealed as a lie. So I held on tighter, clenched my jaw harder, and told myself this was survival, that this was what strength looked like, that this was the only way to make it through. But deep down, beneath the bitterness and the anger and the fear, a question whispered that I couldn't quite silence. How do I stop myself from becoming a prisoner to this rage? How do I find a way out when I can't even see the door? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. All I had was this mounting pressure, this sense that something had to give, that I couldn't keep living like this forever. But change felt impossible, forgiveness felt impossible, and so I drove back to campus, back to my dorm room, back to the walls I'd built around my heart. And I waited for something to shift, for some clarity to break through the chaos, for some way forward that didn't feel like betraying myself. But that night, sitting in the darkness with my phone silent beside me, all I felt was the weight of everything broken and the bitter certainty that it would never be whole again. The church fellowship hall had never felt so cold. I sat in the back row, arms crossed, trying to make myself invisible as the emergency meeting dragged on. Folding chairs scraped against the linoleum floor. Whispers rippled through the rows like wind through dry grass. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered, casting everyone in a harsh, unflattering glow. We need to remember that Pastor Montgomery has served this church faithfully for 15 years, someone said from the front. An elder, one of my father's closest friends. One mistake doesn't erase all the good he's done. One mistake? The voice came from the middle of the room, sharp and cutting. He betrayed his vows. He betrayed this entire congregation. And now we're supposed to just forgive and forget? More voices joined in, some defending, others accusing. The room fractured before my eyes, people I'd known my whole life choosing sides, drawing battle lines. I watched it all from the back, feeling like a ghost haunting my own life. Nobody looked at me. Nobody acknowledged I was even there. I was the pastor's son, the walking reminder of the scandal everyone wanted to either defend or condemn. Where do I belong when my community turns against me? The question burned in my chest. Because this was supposed to be family. This was supposed to be the place where broken people found grace, where sinners found redemption. But instead, it felt like a battlefield, and I was caught in the crossfire with no cover, no refuge, no safe place to land. The meeting ended without resolution. People filed out in tense clusters, avoiding eye contact, their faces hard and closed. I waited until the room was nearly empty before I stood up and left. My hands shoved deep in my pockets, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. Can I trust God if His people reject me? The question followed me out into the parking lot, into my car, all the way back to campus. Because if God's people couldn't show grace, if the church couldn't be a safe place for broken families, then what was the point of any of it? Late that night, I lay in my dorm room staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My phone glowed on the nightstand, a constant stream of notifications I couldn't bring myself to check. My roommate snored softly across the room, oblivious. Outside, someone laughed on their way back from a party, the sound jarring and out of place. I picked up my phone and scrolled through social media. More posts about my father, more opinions from people who'd never met him but felt entitled to judge. Some called for his resignation. Others defended him with a fervor that made my stomach turn because it felt less like grace and more like denial. The anger rose in my chest like bile. Part of me wanted to respond, to lash out, to expose even more of the truth they didn't know. I could write a post. I could share my own story. I could make sure everyone knew exactly how deep the betrayal went. The thought gave me a sick sense of satisfaction, like scratching an itch until it bled. But then another voice whispered in the back of my mind, quieter but persistent. Words I'd memorized years ago in youth group, words that now felt like an accusation. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Romans 12:17-18. How do I respond when I'm hurt so deeply? Because revenge felt justified. Retaliation felt like justice. But something about those words from Romans nagged at me, wouldn't let me settle into my anger completely. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12:21. Can I bless my enemies, or must I protect myself first? The tension pulled me in two directions. Faith demanded one thing. Self-preservation demanded another. And I didn't know which voice to listen to, which path to follow. So I lay there in the darkness, my phone screen casting blue shadows on the ceiling, trapped between my pain and the impossible demands of forgiveness. By morning, I'd made a decision of sorts. I wasn't going to church. I wasn't going to face those people, endure those stares, pretend everything was fine when my world was still burning down around me. I turned off my phone and shoved it in a drawer. The silence that followed felt like relief at first, then like suffocation. My Bible sat on my desk, closed, gathering dust. I'd brought it to college out of habit, but I hadn't opened it in weeks. Couldn't bring myself to. Every time I looked at it, I heard my father's voice from the pulpit, preaching about faithfulness and integrity, and the hypocrisy of it all made me want to throw the book across the room. Friends texted. My youth pastor called. Even my mentor from church reached out. I ignored them all. Isolation felt safer than vulnerability. Anger felt stronger than admitting how lost I really was. I told myself that forgiveness was weakness, that grace was just another word for letting people get away with hurting you. I told myself that God must have abandoned me because if He hadn't, none of this would have happened. Is faith even real if I feel this lost? The question haunted me through the day as I skipped classes and stayed in bed, curtains drawn, the world locked out. Can I ever come back from this? Because it felt like I'd crossed some line, like I'd fallen so far that there was no way back up. But that night, exhaustion finally dragged me under. I fell asleep with my defenses up, my heart hardened, my mind still churning with bitterness and unanswered questions. The dream came softly at first, like morning light through curtains. I was standing in a field I didn't recognize, golden grass swaying in a gentle breeze. The air smelled clean, like after rain. And then I saw Him. Jesus. I knew it was Him even though I'd never seen His face, even though every painting and movie had given me a different image. But in the dream, I just knew. He walked toward me with this expression I couldn't quite name. Not pity, not judgment, just this deep, abiding tenderness that made my chest ache. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, and in that look, I felt seen in a way I'd never felt seen before. Not as the pastor's son, not as the scandal, just as Ethan. Just as me. "You're carrying something too heavy," he said finally, his voice quiet but clear. "It was never meant to be yours to carry alone." I wanted to argue, wanted to defend my anger, my right to be bitter. But the words caught in my throat. Because standing there in front of him, the bitterness felt less like armor and more like chains, less like protection and more like prison. "Let it go," he said, and he reached out his hand. I woke up gasping, my heart pounding, sweat cooling on my forehead. The dream lingered like smoke, too real to dismiss, too strange to fully understand. But something had shifted. Some small crack had appeared in the wall I'd built around my heart. Could mercy be what I need to survive this? The question no longer felt ridiculous. It felt like possibility. Like maybe, just maybe, there was another way forward that didn't involve drowning in my own anger. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Psalm 34,018. The verse came to me unbidden, something I'd learned years ago but never really understood until now. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Maybe God hadn't abandoned me. Maybe He'd been there all along, waiting for me to stop running long enough to notice. 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from Pastor Mike at a coffee shop near campus. He was one of the associate pastors at church, someone who'd known me since I was a kid. I'd finally answered one of his texts, and he'd suggested meeting up, no pressure, just a talk. The coffee shop was warm and crowded, the smell of espresso thick in the air. Students huddled over laptops. A barista called out orders. Normal life happening all around us while my world still felt like it was falling apart. "I'm glad you reached out," Pastor Mike said, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup. He had kind eyes, the sort that made you feel like you could say anything without fear of judgment. "I don't know why I did," I admitted. "I'm still so angry." "That's understandable, is it? Because everyone keeps telling me I need to forgive, that I need to move on. But nobody seems to get how much this hurts." Pastor Mike nodded slowly. Forgiveness isn't about pretending it doesn't hurt. It's not about saying what happened was okay. It's about releasing the person from the debt they owe you, trusting God to handle the justice you can't. I stared down at my own coffee, watching the steam rise. "That sounds impossible." "It is," he said, "on your own. But with God's grace, it becomes possible. Not easy, but possible." He pulled out his phone and scrolled for a moment, then read aloud, "Get rid of all bitterness, rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you." Ephesians 4:31-32. The words hit harder than I expected. I don't know if I can. "Can you forgive without condoning what your father did?" Pastor Mike asked gently. I thought about it. I don't know. Doesn't forgiving him mean letting him off the hook? No. It means you're choosing not to let his sin keep poisoning your heart. It means you're choosing freedom over bitterness. "And Ethan." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Forgiveness frees the forgiver more than the offender. Holding on to this anger is killing you. I can see it. Could I forgive without condoning sin?" The question circled in my mind. Is grace truly enough to heal this? Because the wound felt too deep, the betrayal too profound. But maybe, just maybe, grace was bigger than I'd given it credit for. That evening, I drove home. My mother had texted asking if I could come by, and something in her message made me say yes. The house felt different when I walked in, quieter, heavier, like it was holding its breath. She was sitting in the living room, the same worn sofa where I'd sat weeks ago when the video first broke. She looked tired, older somehow, but there was something peaceful in her expression that I couldn't quite place. "Thanks for coming," she said as I sat down across from her. "What did you want to talk about?" She was quiet for a moment, gathering her words. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." My chest tightened. "What?" "I've known about your father's affair for 2 years," she said, her voice steady but sad. "Not the details, not everything, but I knew something was wrong. I confronted him multiple times. I begged him to get help, to confess, to make it right." The room tilted. 2 years? She nodded. "I've been praying every single day for our family. I've been interceding for your father, asking God to bring the truth to light, to bring healing, to break through his pride and denial. I didn't tell you because," her voice cracked slightly, "because I wanted to protect you. I wanted to hold on to hope that we could fix this before it destroyed everything." I couldn't speak, couldn't process what she was saying. "I know it might feel like I lied to you by not telling you," she continued, "but I was trying to fight for our family in the only way I knew how. Through prayer, through quietly confronting sin, through holding on to grace even when it hurt." The revelation crashed over me like a wave. All this time, I'd thought I was alone in this pain. I'd thought my mother was just another victim, passive and blind. But she'd been fighting all along. She'd been bearing the weight, holding the line, interceding in ways I never saw. Could grace have been at work even when I felt abandoned? The question took on new weight, new meaning. Because if my mother could pray for my father even while confronting his sin, if she could hold on to hope even when the foundation was cracking, then maybe forgiveness wasn't naive. Maybe it was the bravest thing possible. "Mom," I said, my voice rough, "I don't know what to do with this." "I'm not asking you to forgive him right now," she said gently. "I'm just asking you to know that you're not alone in this. You've never been alone. God has been holding our family through this the whole time, even when it didn't feel like it." I left her house in a daze, my mind reeling. The drive back to campus passed in a blur. By the time I got to my room, it was late. The campus quiet, most people already asleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, my phone lighting up with messages I still hadn't answered. The church board wanted a statement. Friends wanted to know where I stood. Even the local Christian blog had reached out asking for an interview. The pressure to respond publicly loomed like a storm cloud. Everyone wanted answers, wanted me to take a side, wanted me to either defend my father or condemn him publicly. The weight of it pressed down on my shoulders until I could barely breathe. But beneath the pressure, beneath the fear and confusion, something else stirred. A small voice, quiet but persistent, asking a different question. What does forgiveness really cost me? And more importantly, what does holding on to this bitterness cost? The anger that had defined me for weeks now felt different. Less like armor, more like a cage. Less like strength, more like slow death. The revelation about my mother's prayers had cracked something open inside me, let a sliver of light into the darkness I'd been living in. Can I face the crowd with grace, or will I crumble? I didn't know. The thought of standing before the church, of being vulnerable, of choosing forgiveness when everything in me screamed for justice, it terrified me. But staying here, in this prison of bitterness, terrified me more. I lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart torn between fear and something that might have been hope. Tomorrow felt like a cliff edge. Tomorrow felt like a choice I couldn't unmake. Tomorrow, everything would change. The question was whether I'd have the courage to let it. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying everything. The dream, the coffee shop conversation, my mother's revelation, the weight of tomorrow pressing down like a physical thing. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and turned on the light. My Bible was still on the desk where I'd left it weeks ago. I picked it up, the leather cover smooth and cool in my hands. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. Maybe proof that God hadn't abandoned me. Maybe permission to stay angry. Maybe just something to fill the silence. I flipped through the pages randomly, and my eyes landed on Luke 15, the prodigal son. I'd heard the story 1,000 times, acted it out in Sunday school, memorized the key verses for youth group competitions. But that night, reading it alone in the dim light of my dorm room, it felt like I was seeing it for the first time. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. Luke 3:11-13. I thought about my father, about his betrayal, his squandering of trust and integrity, about how he'd taken everything we built as a family and thrown it away for something that couldn't last. But then I kept reading. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.'" So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. Luke 3:17-20. The image stopped me. The father running, not waiting for the son to grovel or prove himself, not demanding explanations or apologies first, just running, arms open, ready to embrace. What does it mean to be truly welcomed despite failure? I wondered. Because the son in the story deserved nothing. He'd wasted everything, betrayed his father's trust, brought shame on the family. And yet the father ran to him, threw a party for him, called him son. I kept reading, and the older brother's response hit even harder. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." Luke 3:28-30. I saw myself in that older brother. The anger, the sense of injustice, the bitterness that came from feeling like faithfulness meant nothing if the unfaithful got grace too. But then came the father's response. "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours." But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Luke 3:31-32. Something cracked open inside me. Because I'd been so focused on my father's sin, on the unfairness of it all, that I'd missed the point. Grace wasn't about fairness. It wasn't about who deserved what. It was about a father who ran toward broken people with arms wide open. It was about being welcomed home, not because you earned it, but because that's who the Father is. Can I step into grace instead of shame? The question whispered through my heart. Because staying in my bitterness meant staying in that far country, starving and alone. And maybe, just maybe, forgiveness wasn't about letting my father off the hook. Maybe it was about accepting that I needed the Father's grace just as much as he did. I closed the Bible and sat there in the quiet, tears running down my face. Tomorrow still terrified me, but for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger. I felt hope. Sunday afternoon came too quickly. The church had called a small gathering family, elders, a few close friends. Not the whole congregation, but enough people that my hands shook as I walked into the fellowship hall. The same room where I'd sat invisible and alone just days earlier now felt intimate and terrifying. My mother sat in the front row, her eyes red but her expression steady. My father sat beside her, his head bowed. Pastor Mike gave me an encouraging nod from the side. A handful of youth group kids I'd grown up with sat scattered throughout the room, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. I stood at the front, a folded piece of paper in my hands with notes I'd scribbled at 3 in the morning. My voice came out smaller than I'd hoped. "I don't really know how to do this," I started. "I've never had to. I mean, our family has always been the one people came to for help, not the ones who needed it." A few people nodded. Someone cleared their throat. "A few weeks ago, my whole world fell apart. You all know what happened. The video, the scandal, everything. And I was so angry at my father for what he did, at the church for how some of you responded, at God for letting it happen." My voice cracked. I wanted revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted everyone to hurt as much as I was hurting. I looked down at my notes, then decided to just speak from my heart. But holding on to that anger was killing me. It felt like protection, but it was really a prison. And then this week, I had a dream. Jesus showed me that I was carrying something too heavy. And my mom told me things I didn't know, that she'd been fighting for our family all along. Praying, confronting sin, holding on to hope when everything looked hopeless. I saw my mother wipe her eyes. Last night, I read the story of the prodigal son. And I realized I'd been acting like the older brother, angry that grace was being offered to someone who didn't deserve it. But the truth is, none of us deserve it. My father doesn't. I don't. None of us do. And that's the whole point of grace. My hands stopped shaking. My voice grew stronger. So I'm choosing to forgive. Not because what happened was okay. Not because it doesn't hurt anymore. But because I refuse to let bitterness define my life. I refuse to stay in that far country when the Father is running toward me with open arms. The room was silent. Some people had tears streaming down their faces. Others looked conflicted, like they weren't sure if what I was saying was wisdom or weakness. "I don't know what healing looks like for our family," I continued. "I don't know if everything will go back to normal, or if there even is a normal to go back to. But I know that grace is real. I know that God is close to the brokenhearted. And I know that choosing forgiveness, even when it's hard, is choosing freedom." I looked at my father. He was crying openly now, his shoulders shaking. "Dad," I said, my voice soft but clear, "I forgive you. Not because you've earned it, but because we both need grace. And I'm learning what it means to receive it and give it at the same time." He stood up and walked toward me, and I met him halfway. We embraced there in front of everyone, two broken men trying to find our way back home. It wasn't a Hollywood moment. It was messy and painful and real, but it was a beginning. Pastor Mike stood and addressed the room. What Ethan has shown us today is extraordinary courage. This is what it looks like to choose the way of Jesus, to forgive when every instinct says to protect yourself, to extend grace when justice feels more satisfying. Our church needs to learn from this example. He paused, looking around the room. This family has a long road ahead. They'll need our support, our prayers, our grace, not our judgment, not our gossip. Can we commit to being a community of healing rather than condemnation? Several people nodded. A few stood and came forward to pray with us. It wasn't unanimous. Some left quietly, still wrestling with their own questions about grace and justice. But enough stayed that I felt held, supported, less alone than I'd been in weeks. A few weeks later, things looked different. Not perfect, not healed completely, but different. I sat in the living room on a Saturday morning, coffee in hand, watching sunlight stream through the windows and fall across the family photos on the wall. We'd added new ones, candid shots, not staged. My father and me at a coffee shop, talking, my mother in the garden. The three of us at church, imperfect but present. My father came in from the kitchen and sat down across from me. We'd been having these conversations weekly, slowly rebuilding what was broken. It was awkward sometimes, painful often, but necessary. "How are classes going?" he asked. "Good. Busy. I'm behind on a paper, but I'll catch up." He nodded. "And how are you doing? Really?" I thought about it. Better. Not great all the time, but better. Some days I'm still angry. Some days I struggle with trusting you. But some days I see glimpses of who we might become on the other side of this. "That's more than I deserve," he said quietly. "Maybe. But grace isn't about deserving." He smiled, a small, sad smile that carried weight. "No, I'm learning that." The Bible sat open on the coffee table between us. I'd been reading through Psalms, finding comfort in David's honest cries and God's faithful responses. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Psalm 34,008. That verse had become an anchor, something to hold on to when the waves of emotion threatened to pull me under. My mother joined us, setting down a plate of pastries she'd picked up from the bakery. We ate together in comfortable silence, something that would have been impossible a month ago. "Are you going to that campus ministry thing tonight?" she asked me. "Yeah. My friend Jake asked me to share some of my story. I think I'm ready." She squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you for choosing the hard path, for choosing grace." Later that evening, I walked across campus with Jake. The spring air was warm, students everywhere enjoying the weather. We passed the library, the quad, all these familiar places that had felt so foreign just weeks ago. "So you're really doing this forgiveness thing," Jake said. It wasn't a question. "I am, or I'm trying to anyway. It's not a one-time decision. It's something I have to choose again every day." "That sounds exhausting." I laughed. "Sometimes it is, but you know what's more exhausting? Carrying around that bitterness, living in that prison of anger. I tried that, and it was killing me." Jake was quiet for a moment. "I've got some stuff I'm holding on to too. Things people have done to me. Things I can't seem to let go of." "Yeah?" "Yeah. And watching you, I don't know. It makes me wonder if maybe I could too. If maybe there's a different way than just staying angry." I pulled out my phone and found the passage I'd been carrying with me. "Listen to this. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, "It is mine to avenge, I will repay," says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with goods. Romans 12:17, 21. Jake stopped walking. That's what you're doing. Overcoming evil with good. Trying to. It's not about pretending the evil didn't happen. It's not about being a doormat or letting people keep hurting you. It's about refusing to let their evil turn you into something you're not. It's about choosing a different way. Man, Jake said, I need to think about that. We walked on toward the campus ministry building, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Not the kind that came from following someone else's script, but the kind that came from walking through fire and choosing, on the other side, to help others find their way through too. That night, sharing my story with a room full of students, I realized something profound. My father's sin had nearly destroyed me. The betrayal, the shame, the bitterness, it had all threatened to define the rest of my life. But grace had interrupted that story. Grace had given me a different ending, not a perfect one. Not one where all the pain disappeared or all the trust was instantly restored, but one where I could look at my broken family and see hope, where I could carry my scars and still believe in healing, where I could choose forgiveness and find, in that choice, a freedom I'd never known before. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit, Psalm 34,008. He'd proven that to me. In a dream, in my mother's faithful prayers, in a parable about a father who ran toward his broken son, in a community that chose grace over judgment, in my own choice to let go of the anger that was eating me alive. And now, standing in front of these students, sharing what I'd learned, I wanted them to know what I'd discovered, that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the bravest, most difficult, most freeing thing you can do. It's choosing to overcome evil with good. It's choosing life over death. It's choosing to believe that grace is bigger than shame, that hope is stronger than bitterness, that love can heal even the deepest wounds. Maybe you're holding on to something too. Maybe someone hurt you so badly you can't imagine ever letting it go. Maybe you're in that far country, starving and alone, convinced that you're too broken or too angry or too far gone for grace to reach you. I'm here to tell you, you're not. The Father is running toward you right now, arms wide open, ready to welcome you home. Not because you deserve it, not because you've earned it, but because that's who He is. And if He can restore my fractured family, if He can free me from the prison of my own bitterness, if He can turn my story of betrayal into a testimony of grace, then He can do the same for you. All you have to do is take the first step. Let go of the anger. Choose forgiveness. Step into the grace that's already running toward you. It won't be easy. It won't erase the past. But it will change everything about how you live with it. And that, I'm learning, is what healing really looks like.